Hello folks, Phil Gallagher of Thraben U here for another theory video. Today in MTG Level Ups, we're going to be looking at mulligans and trying to make it so that you have a better idea of how to approach the beginning of the game before any spells are even cast. So let's take a look at what we've got going on today. My first piece of advice for you here is to have a plan. So you've opened your hand, and for this example, we're just going to pretend that you're playing Red Prison, okay? So you look at this hand, you probably go, all right, I have lands and spells, I'm going to keep this hand. But what should really come before you keep that hand? What happens before you click the keep button on Magic Online? And I think you need to plan out your sequence. A hand that doesn't have a good plan is likely to be a hand that ends up losing that game, even if it does have a good mix of lands and spells. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. When I look at this hand, I think on turn 1, I'm probably going to play Ancient Tomb and Chalice of the Void. And on turn 2, I'm probably going to play Mountain and Blood Moon. And on turn 3, I will have turned this into a mountain, so I'm going to use Simian Spirit Guide to cast Goblin Rabblemaster, and then this Karn will come along sometime a little bit later in the game. That's my plan. Now, what if your plan isn't good? What if you're on the draw and your opponent starts off with something that makes, you think that Blood Moon is going to be bad? Do you have the ability to adjust your plan with the hand? So let's take a look at an alternative plan. So let's say your opponent leads on fetch land, basic island, Arkham's Astrolabe. And you know Blood Moon isn't going to be good anymore. Well, now your plan can be, I'm going to use Ancient Tomb and Chalice on 1 still, but then on turn 2, I'm going to play Karn instead. I have that possibility. So hands that have a plan and have flexibility to that plan are probably going to end up being very, very good. Now, let's talk about why it's so important to plan out your sequencing before you actually keep your hand. Here's another very similar hand. We just replaced a couple of the cards with some more creatures. So what happens with this hand now? Well, let's say you didn't think very much about your plan. You just kept, and then you went, oh, my opponent led on a non-basic land. I'm going to play Blood Moon. So your turn 1 is Ancient Tomb, Spirit Guide, Blood Moon. And your turn 2 is nothing. And if you miss out on lands, the rest of your hand is nothing. You see the problem here? When you are keeping your hand, when you are making those mulligan decisions, you really need to be thinking about how the game is going to play out. Now, will you be able to plan everything? No. But if you start looking at your hand and go, hey, the best plan that I have actually makes the rest of the hand terrible, you might need to either think about mulliganing that hand or changing how you are going to play out that hand. So for example, this hand is totally capable, but you might instead lead on Ancient Tomb, Spirit Guide, Rabblemaster instead of the Blood Moon. And the Blood Moon might be sort of an end game card for this hand rather than an early game card. I want to make a big distinction between blue and non-blue decks here. Blue decks in many formats, especially in Legacy and Vintage, are held together by cantrips. And the cantrips represent a huge degree of flexibility in the plan, and they allow you to sculpt your hand for whatever situation you need. While a deck like Red Prison or Death and Taxes or Maverick might really need to sculpt their plan based on their opening hand because they're not going to get to look at very many cards, a blue deck might be pretty happy to keep a hand that has a few lands, a few spells, and a few cantrips. This hand here, Brainstorm and Ponder can tie together this hand pretty much no matter what your opponent is doing, and you have a good mix of interaction. Does this hand have a plan? Kind of. The plan is make a plan based on the opposing information and continue to make land drops, hoping that a big bomb like Shark Typhoon will eventually go and end the game if you survive for long enough. Next up, you should be thinking about how your draws will impact your opening hand. How many hits do you have to really improve that hand? Do you need one more land? Well, how many hits do you have? If you have 22 more hits for lands or something like that, yeah, keeping that 2-lander is probably going to be fine. You'll probably draw one pretty soon. How many turns can you afford to wait without drawing what you need? If you've got time, if you can make land drops for a few turns, like, you're probably okay. You're sitting on that 1-lander that is maybe going to miss a land drop and die immediately, maybe not so much. And sort of on that note, how disastrous is it if you don't hit the thing that you are looking for? There's times where any spell might improve a hand and get it to the point where it's keepable. And then there's times where I need this exact thing or this hand goes nowhere. So you can start thinking about math behind your mulligan decision. And on 7, this is often not a big deal. But once you've mulliganed once or twice and you're down to 5 or 6 cards, or maybe even 4 in some cases, that's where it's often crunch time and you start thinking about numbers. So let's take a nice Death and Taxes hand here. You have a 1-lander. Well, what happens if you miss this land? You probably die, right? If you don't hit that second land drop on time, this is a hand where you probably fall behind and you're never going to survive. And you can try to do some easy basic math to figure this out. A Death and Taxes deck might run 23 or 24 lands. You have one of them. You have 23 hits in your remaining cards, and you have 7 of the cards in your hand. You can do like basic level fractions to figure things out. Now, you're sitting at home playing Magic Online because we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. You can actually do a little bit better than this, though. You can use what's called a hypogeometric calculator to go and crunch the numbers. In the comments, or I guess I'll just do it in the description, I'm going to link to an article from Channel Fireball about the math behind figuring out how to know how likely it is that you hit something in a certain number of draws. When you go and look at things, it might look a little scary, but it's not nearly as complicated as you think. This is really useful for going, hey, I need to hit a land drop in 3 draws. How likely is that to happen? This is not the sort of math that you can do in your head easily while you are going and playing in a paper event. But if you're playing on Magic Online, you have the luxury of time on your side where you can go and just take a minute to plug in all of these numbers and see how things pan out. Finally, the other tip I have for you in terms of making mulligan decisions is thinking about the metagame share. Let's use another Death and Taxes hand. And I'm going to push numbers to the extreme here to make the point. It's never going to be this pronounced, but you should get the general idea. Let's say we are playing in a metagame where Delver-style decks make up 50% of the metagame. Again, that's not a realistic number, but we're going to use big round numbers to show the idea here, right? So you're playing in a metagame that's 50% Delver. Would you keep this hand? Hell yeah, every time. If you get paired against the most popular deck, you are going to have answers to all of their early threats, and you have the ability to get a bunch of life gain on the table as well to help you stabilize or sort of grow your lead. You would be very happy with this sort of hand against a Delver-style deck. Now, let's imagine that the metagame is now 50% combo. Doomsday got a new toy, and all of a sudden it's the best thing to be doing. Well, you're going to play against combo half the time. This hand does literal nothing. Like, these cards have no text there. So one of the things you should be doing when you're thinking about opening hands, especially if they're borderline, is think, what matchups is this actively good against? Now let's take a real example from the current metagame. Let's say that you're playing some deck and you have an opening hand that is good against both Snow and Delver, but it's bad against most other things. Would I keep that opening hand? Yeah. Those are the most popular decks right now. And if you keep a hand that's good against the most popular decks, even if it's a little bit sketchy, that's against many of the other decks in the format, that's probably an okay place to be for a game 1 scenario. All right, so that's what I've got for you today. I'm trying to keep these MTG level up videos to about 10 minutes. So I hope you all enjoyed. If you did and you want to see more of these, please click the like button. That will let me know that you want to see more of this in the future. The previous one didn't perform particularly well, but someone was really excited to see more of these and donated to help make that happen. That information is also in the description. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and I hope this was useful to you.